I'm Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska, this is Gallup's Call to Coach with special guest Dr. Jim Harter and Jim Asplund, recorded on March 21st, 2014. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talents of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. And I will say today we'll have a lot of strengths enthusiasts coming in as well. And so we welcome you, not just for coaches, a lot for you strength enthusiasts as well. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the show, we do have a live chat room available for you. It's right below the main video window. If that section is blank, that just means your browser is not supporting that, and we have a direct link to the chat room available. You'll see some writing that says issues, ? And right below that is a link to it as well, and in most cases that will get you to the chat room. And if you're listening to the recorded version of this, you can email those questions to us after the show, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your coaching resources and training needs. You can get additional strengths codes there as well if you'd like those for your family. You can also catch the video in both streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening if you want to put it on your phone and listen to it in the car, maybe on the way to work. For this show and all the past ones, we were talking about that in advance, about 20 shows we have out there for you now. All available over on the coach's blog, coaching.gallup.com. Jeremy Petrosini is our host today. Jeremy works as a learning and development consultant at Gallup, although he never seems to be in the Gallup office. He's always coming in from somewhere else. Jeremy, welcome, and it's good to see you.
Thanks, Jim. Good to be here. Yeah, coming in from South Carolina today. So I think the weather, though, here has been the same as Omaha all week. But excited for today's call. As Jim mentioned, again, we've been doing these calls. We do them twice a month. We know some of you out there are coaches or thinking about coaching, whether it's within your organization or independently. And it's been fun for us the last just about year to provide these calls, give you additional information, insight into everything Gallup knows about strengths. So we are excited today to have two of our senior scientists with us who, guys, again, have really helped develop Strengthsfinder, again, continue to keep it what it is, and not just kind of a fun assessment for people to take, but something that really leads to business impact and makes organizations stronger. So the one thing I will say, and again, thank you for the coaches who are out there. Some of you may have additional questions around coaching. You can check all that out at coaching.gallup.com. We're quickly approaching 10 million people that have completed the Clifton Strengthsfinder. So when you think about individuals who have discovered their talents, their strengths, to do what they do best, to enjoy their jobs every day, and really be more productive in the workplace, strengths has been the key to those 10,000. So it's exciting, or 10 million. So it's exciting for us to know we're continuing to want to hit that goal of 1 billion people. And again, we know that we won't do that just on our own, but we want to have 1 million external coaches that help us do that. So we're excited, again, for those of you out there who are listening today, and we've got a lot of insight to share. So I know we kind of joked at the beginning of the call. We got Jim Collison as our producer. We've now got Dr. Jim Harter and Jim Asplund. So we got 3 Jims and a Jeremy, but I'll refer to these guys primarily by last name so we know who's who. But Dr. Harter, I'll introduce you first, and excited to have you guys both here. But Dr. Harter's our chief scientist at Gallup. He's authored the book 12, which many of you have kind of come across, was the sequel to our bestseller, First Break All the Rules, talking about the 12 core elements to managing. Helping people discover what they do best is one of those 12 elements. And Jim's been with the organization for since 1985. Is that right, Harter?
That's right. 28 years.
So 28 years. You've also co-authored our research around well-being, which, as I was eating French fries at the start of the call, we'll pretend you didn't see that. But welcome.
I saw it.
Good to have you. Yeah, you saw it. So. And then Jim Asplund is with us. And Jim, I think you've been with Gallup since 1999. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Jim has done a real fantastic job, again, of helping us quantify what impact the strengths have within an organization. Jim Asplund's co-authored one of our books, Human Sigma, which is managing the employee customer experience. Again, kind of that whole piece of if you can measure, the core fundamentals of your business, great. But if you don't understand your people, both on the employee and the customer side, you're really missing some opportunity to drive performance. So, Jim Asplund, we're excited to have you here as well.
Thanks.
So, guys, why don't we start out, and both of you again kind of have a rich history with Gallup. from a research science standpoint, I know a lot of our fans out there, both as coaches, consultants, or people maybe that are new to Strengthsfinder, are really excited about the fact that it's not just something we threw together and it seemed to work, and has a little bit of that Yorkshire, just kind of you stare at it and go, yeah, I guess I'm an activator, but it really is true to who you are, your personality, and how you perform. Talk a little bit, and Harter, why don't we start with you? Talk a little bit just on kind of your journey to Gallup, the things you've been able to be exposed to from the time you joined, and why you're still part of this organization today.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Jeremy. And, first of all, thank you all for bringing the science to life. I mean, the reason we do this work is so that people can make better decisions, and the strengths work is really exciting because we can see firsthand how people use it, and thank you very much for all the work you do. You all have talents that I know I don't have. My work goes back, I was privileged to have Don Clifton as a mentor for about 17 years, and I started off at Gallup with an internship when I just finished my undergraduate work, and Don asked me about a year in if I wanted to do some research with him. I thought I probably ought to take him up on that offer, and I'm glad I did. But Don always asked the question, what would happen if we studied what's right with people, and he really challenged the status quo. Back then in the 80s, and even before then when Don started this work in the 50s and 60s, it was pretty controversial to think about, that you ought to focus on people's strengths, because most of psychology was focused on what's wrong with people. So
right.
This research really came out of a lot of iterations of work, and a lot of instruments that are developed over time, personality type instruments. They start off with a sample, and the instrument's developed and it's used and it's maybe studied again later. This actually happened through iterations where we were studying successful people in a lot of different areas of life. One of the areas that Don Clifton first started studying were counselors. He found that students were having very different experiences, and he learned that it had to do with the strengths of the counselors. And then that led to studies of teachers and insurance sales and athletes and managers and all sorts of different walks of life. But those accumulated studies with asking the question, who are the best people in these jobs, and how are they successful, and what are the characteristics of these successful people, what are their talents, all of those studies, those hundreds of studies, led up to the initial development of Strengthsfinder.
Yeah, and Harter, there obviously were a lot of great assessments out there when Don and team kind of started playing around with this. But what was it different that Don was researching? Again, you talked about kind of finding what's right with people, but I know people ask all the time, what if we use Myers-Briggs or use something different? How was it even from the initial early research phases that you guys saw that there was still an opportunity for us to discover something more about what makes people tick?
Yeah, thematic language is a bit more specific than some of the traditional measures you might think of, like the Big Five or the Myers-Briggs. They're a bit more general in nature, still can give some good feedback to people, but think about breaking some of those down into even more specific elements. And the starting point really is studying success, not studying the average, not studying the bell-shaped curve, but studying people way over to the right of the distribution that are highly successful. So that's a little bit different starting point, but then the themes are even more specific. And I think that's why it resonates so well with people, is because people like to know more specificity than that I'm agreeable, or that I'm an extrovert or an introvert. They want to know with even more specificity how they can understand who they are and use that to affect change.
Right. Callison and I might both be extroverts in a Myers-Briggs assessment, but our talent themes, those top five, could be very, very different. Actually,
right.
They are quite different. So, Asplund, I want to hear a little bit of your thoughts too. So you joined the organization in '99. Tell us a little bit about your journey to Gallup. Obviously, within your area of research, you do a lot of different things, but strengths is really kind of that core piece that you've been able to help us continue to think about. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Yeah, I joined Gallup, as you said, in 1999, from my mid-30s at the time. Kind of a career change for me. I had been doing similar work in the sense that it was sort of statistical consulting of a different stripe in the sort of political arena. Policy work with some school districts and some other entities within Minnesota, and I I got kind of tired of how corrosive an environment that was, so I was actually repelled by the negativity I faced every day. And I may be the last person I know who did this, but I came home one day sort of exasperated, and I found the newspaper on top of my island in my kitchen, and there was a job, an advertisement for a job in the newspaper, and it turned out to be the one I have now. So for people on the call who don't know what newspapers are, they used to be these things that came to your house in paper, and and so I actually answered an ad in the paper, and then I've been here ever since. And it's interesting within the context of Strengthsfinder. One of the very first things I did when I sort of started meeting people here was I took the early version, the 35 theme version of Strengthsfinder that was sort of being piloted. So I was one of the sort of first people to take it outside Gallup. And that the positivity of the thing attracted me right away, especially in contrast to what I had been doing. And so it's nice. And again, I like to echo what Jim said about everybody here being on the call, because development is a dynamic process, and I think without the intervention of people like coaches on the call here, helping people kind of emerge kind of to be the best version of who they are, it's hard for people to do on their own. I mean, I think some can, but it's difficult, and so it's an ongoing process. It's experiences and the context of our experiences are important, even once you're given that theme information. And to kind of pile on also to what Jim was saying about the sort of richness of the data, in addition, just even when you give people the top 5 data, I mean, there's so many different possible combinations of those data, and even with people who have some similar constellation of themes, the way they express them because of which one's more dominant for them at a given moment can also be very different. So the multivariate richness that Strengthsfinder allows us to be more specific, I think, than some of the other tools, partly by virtue of the just sheer number of options available, not all of which I pulled every top 5 in the database a couple months ago, and there's still some we haven't seen that are possible. And also the lack of ipsativity in the instrument, so you aren't forcing people to kind of choose on those continuum like introvert, extrovert so much as you are on something like, say, a Myers-Briggs, and so you get again a little more variety in the possibility. I think that's particularly important for people who probably on some of those more those other instruments like the Myers-Briggs, who probably feel like they fit kind of somewhere in the middle there. I think we probably have a lot more. Accuracy is kind of a loaded word, but I think we can provide a lot more information for people who sit in kind of that gray zone around the middle of those axes on those sort of instruments that require you to kind of pick a side. So that's been part of the fun part here, and for a guy like me who's kind of trained in math and statistics, working here with just tons and tons of data coming in every day, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know you and Harter alike are grateful for the people on the call who like working with people, so you guys can do what you do best and work with the numbers, right?
We were worried that people might think we were supposed to be good at coaching, and I think our total lack of empathy, at least ability to sense the feelings of myself, let alone others, might inhibit our ability to do that.
I know there's people out there that, especially those that are familiar with Gallup and obviously the use of the word themes, and we've got 34 of these signature themes of talent, right? That when people productively apply them, they can really turn into strength. You mentioned that you joined the organization when there were 35. What was that 35th theme, or give us a little bit of the insights to even how we got to 34 and why we're still at 34 today, 20 years later?
Well, it was. Research like this is always kind of an ongoing process, and speaking to our theme language for people at Gallup and myself in particular are loaded up with maximizer, and so you're kind of never happy with what you've got, right? So you always want to make it better and make it as good as you can. And as you accumulate data, you can look at things in a different way, and you get different ideas and you can test them. And so the 35th theme, I think actually it's a harder question than that because there's 2 or 3 of them we ended up collapsing. But the easy answer is we used to have kind of 2 versions of activator. One was called stimulator, and so we kind of collapsed part of that into activator. I think a little bit wound up in positivity, and then we've changed tweaked the meaning and the definition of some of the themes also too. Because at that time, I mean, we were I think there may be 5,000, 10,000 people that take Strengthsfinder when I took it the first time. And so obviously we're several orders of magnitude past that now. And also, we had to actually, I think a lot of people aren't aware that initial pool was actually pretty diverse. I mean, we had a lot of international taking Strengthsfinder early on, and so it wasn't so much that it was a sample of all college students in Nebraska, but it was actually a pretty diverse sample. But just as we accumulate more data, you can firm up some of those definitions. And we found that, and we've always open to this, whenever we look at the theme data, and I do this regularly, open to the idea that either there's one we need to add or one or two that need to go away, and so we test those kinds of things.
Yeah, and talk a little bit too. You talked about the uniqueness of just the way that a top 5 appears, kind of that random sample component. Like you said, you're looking at top 5s all the time, which again, people that are maybe newer to Strengthsfinder know you at least see these top 5. The reason, obviously, for showing that is we don't want people to focus on where they aren't as dominant, but what are they dominant in. But talk about kind of that, kind of just unique component of that with strengths that maybe is different again than a Myers-Briggs or other assessments out there.
Well, I think other Jim Harter, I keep forgetting we can't go by Jim here, was actually around when this happened, so he might want to pile in on this too. But the initial choice of kind of 5 was a guess. In the absence of doing anything, I know Tom Rath always used to say that maybe 5 was too many. Should have picked 3, but 5 seems to kind of work for most people. And some of the way we do this, we arrived at by trial and error. So we used to give people intensity scores on their themes, or at least in some circumstances that would happen, and we found that created probably more bad behaviors than it helped, with people comparing intensities with each other and who has more in the high scoring range than others people. And so we kind of went away from that and ran the other direction and kind of went back to just a simple rank ordering of these top 5. And I think people could spend a lot of time working on just those 5, maybe even 2 or 3 of those 5, and get a lot out of it if those are the 2 or 3 that really speak to them or really are natural for them to kind of work on. And so I think we start in that nice sort of ecumenical or even sort of place where we give everybody 5, or in the case if they get all 34, then that's the full set, with a ranking without kind of imposing a kind of what looks like a value judgment. I think with the intensities we did in the past, which was not the intent.
Right, and the uniqueness, the stat we use on that is for me to find somebody with the exact same top 5 as mine is 1 in 33.3 million, right? And it's that rare of finding kind of somebody else on this planet with the same order. Yeah.
Same order. I, by the way, have met someone with mine with the same order. It can happen. He used to work here, and so there was one. So it can happen, but the odds are pretty low.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool part about it is, again, even if we share 4 of our top 5, that 5th ingredient, I say it's almost like cookies or something. Whether you throw in chocolate chips or oatmeal, not that we eat cookies, Harter, but if we did hypothetically, I mean, it changes it just by adding that one piece, whether it's positivity or woo or activator. So Harter, I want you to talk about something too, because I know in a lot of our research, and we update our workplace data annually. I love Asplund's story of kind of he was doing part of what he loved, which was research, but in an environment where he kind of felt like, all right, this is not where I'm doing what I do best every day, which I know is the language we've used to help organizations measure engagement. Talk about that a little bit. I know that kind of general stat is that we know only about 1 in 3 people strongly agree with that item, but talk about the importance of strengths in the workplace, what it does to create, engaged environments both for individuals, teams, and managers.
Well, yeah, it's having a chance to do what you do best is one of the. I mean, it's hard to say there's one single best engagement element in the workplace, but if you had to pick one, that'd be in the top 3 for sure, because of all the things that it affects. Whether we're studying people in the moment and have them answer questions in the moment about their mood, their energy levels. If they, before the study, if they said they had an opportunity to do what they do best, they have much higher energy levels, much higher interest levels in the moment, all the way to, if you take it back to a macro level, individuals who have an opportunity to do what they do best, they're in business units that tend to be more profitable. They treat customers better. they're more productive, they're more likely to stay in the organization. So there's kind of the macro level outcomes, and there's the everyday ones as well, the well-being kinds of outcomes about mood and all the things that build up to affect our health over time. So that's one of the most important of the 12 elements that we know generalize across the world in terms of their importance. Having a chance to use your strengths relates to higher self-confidence, higher hope, more altruism, of course, higher engagement at work. And then there's, the other side of it is how do you get there? How do you get to somebody saying they have an opportunity to do what they do best? And that comes down then to strengths interventions. And so one of the amazing things to me has been that just giving people feedback on their strengths has really sizable effects in the studies we've done where we have holdout samples that aren't given their strengths, really sizable effects on outcomes like the ones I just mentioned, retention, productivity, whether you're talking about a manager-led team or an individual themselves. These are real important. Now, there's a lot of stuff we can do in the future to build on top of what we know now, but it's pretty amazing how what you all do in your work and those interactions do have an effect on not only life outcomes but also business outcomes. So, kind of improving lives while you're improving performance is how I think about it.
Yeah, I think people miss that a lot. That they see strengths as maybe, again, and even engagement as, hey, let's create kind of a fun place to work. And I know there's a lot of other assessments out there, kind of great place to work and happy workplace. One of our last guests on the last call is an entrepreneur named Larry Broughton, owns Broughton Hotels. He, in the mid-'90s, went through one of our manager training programs with Don Clifton, and he said the takeaway he had when he discovered what Strengthsfinder was and how it can be used is he said it's just a smart business decision. It's a way to decrease turnover and increase profitability. And talk a little bit about that. Either one of you guys can grab this, but I know those tangible things that you just spoke to, Jim, really do hit on. It's not just a nice to have for self or for team or for the organization, but it really is a smart business decision from the data that we've been able to look at over the years.
I'll just say one more thing on that when we study organizations and their engagement levels over time, and we look at the ones that grow at a more rapid rate, the single best kind of conduit to growth is whether they utilize strengths and strengths interventions. And I think that has a lot to do with what it does to enable us to individualize. And the best managers in the world that we've studied for decades, they always individualize. I mean, they're people who are naturally individualized, but strengths provides some language around individualizing so that you can make it tangible and real. And I think that's why it works so well. Otherwise, people are in a room thinking, this person ought to be more like me, and not aware that their coworkers or the people that they manage directly are different, and that's good. And that's something that makes the team potentially better if we leverage their talents effectively.
Yeah, that intellectual diversity makes the team stronger, and people who've used strengths to kind of discover that about each other. It goes beyond the minimum sort of discovery, like Jim was saying, that you realize that maybe the person working next to you isn't an idiot for not doing it the way you do it, but that they're actually just a different person who has a different way of doing things. And you can get past kind of the style points or the way people do things and get on how much they're doing or how well they're doing it, and get a better understanding of why that's true. And the key is that individualization. It's true for managers, it's true for teachers, that the ones who are best at individualizing their management of their people and the way they deploy what those people do best on the job, it's going to result in higher performance, and that's certainly what we've seen. And in fact, again, to the coaching aspect of this, that first part is worth a lot, where you learn your strengths. Where we've been able to study it, kind of decomposing it at a couple of clients, that next part where you're actually able to use your strengths on your job adds a lot more. So if you can build your daily activities around what you do best, if your coworkers can understand that about you, and so you start kind of doing things in a way that puts people in the best positions given the options available. Even on I think fairly simple jobs, it can be done in a lot of different ways. And the cool part about one of the other cool parts about working here is that when you start to study excellence and develop an eye for it, you see it actually everywhere. I mean, I see it at the airport, I see it at the Starbucks, I see it everywhere I go. And I think it's sad that a lot of people in this country and outside this country don't get recognized for that, or maybe don't even know that they're good at that sort of thing. And so that's one of the nice parts about this, is helping people kind of discover that about themselves and help them use that in a way that's going to then reinforce that belief and make them even better.
Yeah. No, and again, I think especially when you're thinking about teams, that whole idea of not everybody needs to be like me, nor do I need to be well-rounded and good at everything else. I think strengths, again, brings that language, and that's where you see, again, that nice bump in performance and people doing what they do best. So, Collison, I want to pause for a minute. I don't know if there's what the chat's looking like. There's a lot of questions out there. I know these guys have some cool insights into the R&D of what's next with the evolution of strengths as well that we'll make sure we share before we get off the call. But any questions that have popped up?
Yeah, and Mara's done a great job of answering a lot of the questions. I do want to throw this one out there, though, because I think with just the sheer number of strength enthusiasts we have out there are some new individuals to strengths because of the marketing campaign we did this week to bring you in. But the difference between themes and strengths, Jeremy, as we talk about that, we have these 34 themes, and they translate into strengths, and sometimes we use that interchangeably, but just maybe a little definition around that.
Yeah, you bet. So our formal definition around strengths, and actually let me start with kind of themes and talent. So talent is kind of that natural reoccurring thought pattern or behavior that can be productively applied. I always tell people, if you pick up a pen and write your name, it's easier to do it with one hand versus the other, and that's talent. It's innate. When you productively apply that, and again, this is that whole idea of, if you've read Strengthsfinder 2.0, which is still the New York Times or Amazon's bestseller last year, has continued to be on the New York Times bestselling list as well. But we always say we're not selling books; we're actually selling a movement. And the cool part about that is, the Strengthsfinder assessment lets you look at what are those unique talents. And this is that term theme that we use. We know there's thousands of talents out there, but we, through our research that these guys have been talking about, have put those into 34 kind of buckets that we refer to as talent themes. And so once you've identified your top 5, or even, as Asplund was talking about, just pick 2 or 3 of your 5, if you then kind of begin to think about how you can invest in those talents. So when we say talent times investment equals strength, you can begin to invest in your maximizer, invest in your futuristic. That can then be more productively applied to lead towards strength. And strength, again, is when we talk about doing something with consistent, near-perfect performance. So you think of Tiger Woods swinging a golf club. If you can do it near-perfect performance and people want to pay you to do it over and over again, you've turned that natural, innate talent into strength. So talent by itself, we'd say, is more potential, but when it's productively applied and you really invest in it, that's where it can turn into strength, which is where we see it as performance, or as near perfect outcome.
Okay. We've had a couple diversity questions, and let me, David Pierpoint asked this question. This may cover a few things. So he says, I just lost the question. One second. Has Gallup looked at the effect on the cultural diversity of strength-based organizations? For example, do organizations who are using Strengthsfinder in their hiring process, which is selection and not strengths, but find that they're hiring a wider variety of ethnicity, religion, class, those kinds of things?
We have other instruments we use for selection, which are a bit more pinpointed toward very specific roles. So we don't use Strengthsfinder per se for selection, more for development. From a developmental standpoint, it does open people's eyes and creates a more inclusive culture. From a selection standpoint, if you do use talents as a way, so again, pinpointed to, let's say it's a sales job, we pinpoint the talents toward that sales job with a very specific kind of efficient measure that gets at successful salespeople or managers or teachers. Then if those are developed the right way, you can select people with talent that then brings in more diversity, because talent is diversity free.
Yeah, and in fact, with strengths, even though again we don't use Strengthsfinder for hiring people, we have looked at this sort of application, and in fact just finished a study, or almost finished a study, at a client where they were actually using Strengthsfinder and the strengths learnings around their own development to help the perception and feelings of diversity and inclusiveness at their company, and in fact it did help for some of the same reasons Jim mentioned, in the sense that it's if you kind of preach intellectual diversity and start understanding what's unique about a person, you actually are supplying a new set or a new way of looking at them that helps decouple from the other labels that I think sometimes we find ourselves using. And in fact, we've had a couple other clients do the same thing where it's helped them, especially in a multinational environment, understand each other better when they've got these other sort of more visible sources of diversity, kind of either in a positive or negative way, occupying a lot more of their attention than they probably should be. So it's been good for that.
There's been some interesting studies on that, looking at what's called interpersonal congruence, where people have a chance to get to know each other in a diverse group. Actually improves productivity, and we've done some of our own studies of gender diversity and diversity between the dyad of the individual and their manager, and how differences actually turn into positives when you build the right environment around that. And I think strengths has a big role to play there.
Jim Harter, where would folks go? Do we have some of those studies posted out where folks could read those, especially around the areas of diversity?
Yeah, we've published a couple of them that we could certainly send people papers to or post, so they're available.
Okay, and so if you're interested in that, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, and we can turn those right back around for you. There's been a lot of questions about strengths changing over time, and Jim Harter, let me start with you on this. That's the number one question all the time. If I take the test twice, will it change? Those kinds of things. Because normally we defer that question because we are focused more on coaches, but today, since we have so many strengths enthusiasts, can you talk a little bit about that, Jim Harter?
Yeah, and so, think about the range of things we could measure about people and how they respond to those things, all the way from engagement at work to your personality or your talents. Each of those has a different kind of genetic load on them, or a changeable kind of different changeability to it. So engagement at work is very changeable. Now, there's certainly a predisposition part to it, but that's minor. When you think about things like personality, talents, the kinds of things we're talking about here with kind of the inherent parts of people and their talents, those are less changeable. But now, we would never say that strengths and talents are not changeable at all, but they certainly load heavily toward not changeable. And we've done some retest studies. Jim Asplund has led those, so he should probably talk about them. But I was impressed when I have looked at even 1 month, 3 months, 6 month, the correlation of the rank orderings of people's strengths or themes are very consistent. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't, if you take it again, you might not have a theme pop into the top 5 that wasn't there before, because there's probably a 6th or 7th one that is pretty close to the score of the 5th one. And so no measurement is perfect. We work really hard on making it as close to perfect as we can, but there is no perfect measurement, and so that will lead to some changes over time.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, the test-retest is high, but to make it a lot higher, we'd have to make it so long you wouldn't want to take it.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of a problem. And then there's also the, as you mentioned, the way, because we've chosen to give everybody 5, and the difference between 5 and 6, or 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 might be very small. You don't have to be too facetious, but if the dog is barking one time you take it and distracts you, if their scores are that close to each other, it could slip 1 or 2 of them around, and change that sort of. And so the way we report the scores can sometimes artificially inflate the amount of changes that are actually occurring, but that's just sort of a result of the other decisions we made around how many themes to give people. So. And
Jim Asplund, Randy asks in chat, does the years that transpire between tests make a difference? Have we, versus 3 weeks? We have some folks, for whatever reason, take 3 times in a month, right? Or maybe they're looking for some strengths that they were hoping to get some themes. But what about years? What about 10 years? Does it make a difference? Have we seen anything like that in changes?
Well, doing those term longitudinal studies are hard, especially since we're getting up to where 10 years back, we had maybe 1 million people that take it, which is a lot. I guess in context, you get a little jaded here with all the data. So I'm hoping to do some of that sort of long-term longitudinal stuff soon. We do know cross-sectionally that that younger respondents, for example, tend to have a little bit different profile. So we have a lot of college students who take Strengthsfinder, and they tend to have a slightly different theme profile. And I think the way theirs looks different is congruent or makes sense with other things we know about the sort of personality formation and kind of when people's kind of personality kind of locks in to the extent it locks in. So over 10 years, it should still be pretty stable unless the first time you took it you were 17 or 18, in which case then it might change a little bit more. But as Jim said, we're never going to say it's not going to change because, like we said, development's dynamic. Large, mostly bad things can happen to you, like depression or, horrible injury or death in the family kind of thing can change some of that dynamic, especially if that's happening around the time you're taking the instrument. But we're hoping to kind of get more meat around the longitudinal piece of that soon, now that we're kind of enough years out to start doing that in a serious way. And that involves basically, recontacting people and getting them to take it again if they haven't already done that, so that we can control that circumstance a little bit more.
Very good. And sometimes we get folks really focusing on the strengths themes themselves and not how they use them. And oftentimes, it's the action involved in that's important, and not necessarily just the 5 that show up. Another question, and one of you mentioned a strengths intervention. So it says, can you talk a little about what's included in a strengths intervention? I heard that, but I didn't hear the context around that. What does that mean?
Well, I guess I can start with that. I mean, there's a lot of different flavors of that, and I think everybody on the call who's a coach could probably give you a different answer about how they do it. Sort of in research speak, an intervention could be anything from as simple as telling people their themes to telling them their themes and coaching them over a long period of time about what those mean to them and how they might use them in their daily lives. And so when I think I'm probably one who said it because I use that word a lot. So intervention could be any of those things. And the interesting thing is, I think, we've remained a little agnostic with respect to that when we study these things, because oftentimes we don't know the details of what was done beyond kind of the kinds of things that show up in the administrative data. But also, I think, the situation should vary kind of the way things happen, because you would hope that, again, individualizing a response to people being the theme here, that if a person is highly analytical or highly deliberative, that you would coach them in a different way than if they take information in a very different way. And vice versa, if the coach is the kind of person who's better at building a relationship and then kind of working through things versus someone who's good at explaining complicated things and then kind of letting the relationship happen over time, that interaction between the coach and the respondent, or the information we give the respondent, is going to vary by person to person. So intervention is our general word about that, and we've seen lots and lots of variety of that across the companies that have used Strengthsfinder very deliberately, and the individuals who've taken it and then sought coaching on their own.
So Kendra asked this question. I think it's a good one. How do you know which strengths are actual strengths versus self-identified and potentially not actual strengths? In other words, so to the methodology that we use for the assessment, how does that root that out so that I'm not, gaming the assessment?
Well, they're paired options, each of which are pretty positive options, and so those pairs help to sort that out. Now, if we just listed off a bunch of 1 to 5 scaled questions and asked people to respond to them, there's more of a possibility that they could basically say who they think they are, who they want to be. But since we're providing pairs that people have to choose from, then there's less of a likelihood of that, because both pairs are relatively positive.
And talk about why it's timed as well, Jim. I know that comes up a lot for people. They get frustrated that in the 20 seconds they didn't have enough time to think about it.
Well, it's partly to get that top of mind response. We don't want people overthinking it. In fact, to the extent anyone's trying to get something, we're probably the case if they think they're picking the item that goes to the theme they want, they might not be right. And so part of this is just to kind of keep the test moving along in such a way that it's their natural response. We want their natural inclination. We have run across, I will say, over the years, a couple items got too long, and we had people who really literally couldn't read it fast enough, and so we changed those items several years ago, because we found that the non-response in those was high, and as we looked at it, it was directly proportional to how many words there were in it. So we've taken care of that to the extent we can. And these were people, as we dug into it, who were taking it in English as a second language, and so that was most of the people who were running out of time for a very good reason. But it wasn't a huge slice of the population taking Strengthsfinder. So anyway, we've addressed that where we can. But again, the idea is to get people's natural response so that they don't overthink what they're saying.
And we do allow to disable the timer for folks with special needs?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. So it's available. That's another question we get as well. All right. We're kind of coming up on the end here, Jeremy. Let me ask one more question, and it kind of relates to generational. It's a general. Let me just read the question. So is there any evidence in indicating that generationals, like millennials, Generation X, boomers, bias or concentration has a bias or concentration with particular strengths? Have we done any kind of studies like that across generations?
Yes. Again, they're cross-sectional, so we don't know kind of how people get there. But there are a few differences by age. But I kind of my response to all of these things, whether it's race or gender or country or age, is that the within-group variability is every bit as high or higher than our cross-group variability. So the fact that I have a certain set of themes because I'm a 50-year-old guy from the Midwest doesn't mean Jim Harter and I are supposed to be any more alike than each other because he's another one with a very similar background. We found that, again, there's some age differences. Most of them appear early. I mean, so once you get out of that sort of under 25 group, those differences diminish a bit more. Again, there could be a cohort effect that we haven't identified. I'm not going to rule it out. We keep looking. But again, to the extent that we see those things, the fact that I know that you're 70 or that I know that you're 30 tells me very little about what themes I should expect from you. And that's, so that's a good thing. We like it to be that way. But again, we're not averse to the idea that there could be some of those. So that's why we keep looking.
Yeah, even any slight, pattern we might see is really muted by the wide variation within any subgroup that we have a chance to look at. So it's it can almost be over. Even if we see a small difference, it could almost be overstated in terms of what it really means and how you could even apply it. The other thing I'd like to point out, though, is that these talents, this goes to personality research as well as our research, is that there's wide generalizability in terms of their how they work, how they fit together, and how talents emerge across different parts of the world. And even growing personality research is showing that what people once thought were big differences across cultures are not very big differences anymore. And so science has helped refine that knowledge quite a bit just in the recent 5 years or so. But we see that the structure of these talents holds together in a wide variety of contexts. And I think it has something to say about human nature, and what you all are doing in your work is really leveraging human nature and helping people get the most out of who they are.
It's tough to jam so much information into just a 45-minute session that we have here, and we've gotten a lot of questions that I did get to. So first of all, we want to say thanks. If we didn't get to your question, sorry about that. We can continue that conversation over on the Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/groups/call-to-coach. That will get you there, and post your question. We have a lot of videos available for you as well on past shows, and some of the questions you've asked we've covered in past shows. So if you've got some time, head over to our Facebook group. Just search Gallup Strength Center on YouTube, and that will get there as well. Jeremy, let me throw it back over to you. We've got some stuff coming up that we want to highlight, and we'll wrap things up here for Call to Coach.
Yeah, so two things. One, I want to hear from these guys real quick on what people can anticipate is coming next from our research. I know we just recently launched our entrepreneurial Strengthsfinder. In the past, people have seen when Strengthsfinder 2.0 came out, it was a new report. When strength-based leadership came out, it brought the 4 domains that can be used with teams and the 4 needs of followers. What exciting stuff, guys, is kind of in the R&D labs that people can be looking forward to in the next months and years?
Well, I can start. We have 2 or 3 things that I think I'm pretty excited about. One is we're taking a much more direct look at how to use strengths information to help people identify careers. To put it bluntly, I think there's a lot of different reasons people would either just graduating from college or, if you're like me, looking for a career change. How to use the strengths information that we give them to better think through that process and identify better options. I think for them is one thing we're diving into pretty hard right now. And we're also actually starting pretty soon a study on, I use that intervention word again, where I try to get a little better sense of the dose, if you will, that works best and it may vary by who you are, right? So what's the right way to kind of spread out the theme information we give people, and is it better provided all at once or in chunks of size that we haven't tried so far. And so again, getting very general around which interventions seem to give people the most bang per use, if you will, as we disseminate that information. And then we're also, Jim and I are working on this one together, going to be looking at team composition this year. So how do strengths inform the way teams are put together, the way teams can be more effective and productive and more cohesive. And so that's a very general idea. We've got a lot of ideas about how to do that, but I think that one's one that could be a lot of value for people.
Yeah, whether a team, to what extent should a team be balanced versus imbalanced? I think that's one we have a lot to learn about going forward. We've learned a few things, but there's a lot more to learn there, and we'll be diving into that. The other one is strengths-based parenting. We're working on some work there that I think will be useful to a lot of people. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is strengths and well-being. We've done quite a bit of work in understanding just how people can improve their lives overall, and what the dimensions are that people should be focusing on, from, again, looking at people all over the world and what relates to a good life and good days. And strengths, of course, plays a role in that. How do I do that through who I am, as opposed to trying to be someone else? And so understanding that those two and how those two things interact, I think, is an important part of our R&D plan going forward also.
Yeah, no, I love it. I appreciate you guys even teasing some of that out, because as a maximizer as well, it's always kind of we've got something good, but how do we make it better? And hearing all those pieces, it's always fun to know there's more coming down the pike. And Asplund, like, even when you were talking about the careers piece, I know this comes up a lot for people to say, if I'm woo, should I be in sales? Not necessarily, but we haven't had a lot in the past besides, I think, Chapter 10 in Strengths Quest, kind of geared again for college students thinking about career. I love that we've got a lot more, and then with the team piece. Yeah.
Our goal is to not, because I think being overly prescriptive there is probably what's not been very useful to people in the past. Right. And so what we're really looking to is to help people have a better process and to use kind of who they are and identify people who are like them, if possible, to create a better conversation and process around identifying that for themselves. Because I think you're right. I mean, a lot of people who have woo could be horrible salespeople. Yeah. So, and maybe hate it too. So, we don't want to go there.
Yeah. No, I think it's great, and appreciate you guys teasing that out and all the work you guys continue to do. So our next call, for those of you out there again who may be new or have jumped on calls in the past, again, we keep a twice a month cadence on these. We will be bringing on an external coach by the name of Dr. Angela Robles. She is president and founder of an organization called Forza Institute, and works a lot with athletes, with thinking about how do you really build on your strengths to succeed. And again, a lot of times if you Google strength coach, it talks more about physical strength than it does kind of from a talent strength positioning. But she really has taken and utilized the Clifton Strengthsfinder to really help people think about performance, specifically even just through the lens of athletics. So, guys, maybe depending on the outcome of the Nebraska game, maybe we need to do a little work at UNL at the end of this too. So, but that'll be April 4th. Will be that call at noon Central.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. We'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we have available. In this program, lots of questions we couldn't get to, and actually we've covered a lot of that information in some of our past programs. So let me encourage you a couple things to do. One, if you're new to strengths and you want more information, head out to the Gallup Strengths Center. That's just gallupstrengthscenter.com. I mentioned before, you can send us your comments or questions. Send those over to us, coaching@gallup.com, and we'll try to get back to you with those answers as well, especially if you're looking to links for research and some of those kinds of things. Give us a couple days, and we'll try and get you some links back. Really encourage you to join our Facebook group, so facebook.com/groups/call-to-coach. It's for strengths enthusiasts and coaches alike, but a lot of good questions we could get to as well, and post them out there. And then let me remind you of our YouTube page, youtube.com/user/Gallup Strengths, or just search Gallup Strengths Center on YouTube, and that will get you there as well. We also have several meetups, and we're starting to build the momentum on our strengths meetups. That's for coaches and for strengths enthusiasts. Around the country, we have one in Indianapolis that is coming up here at the end of March, as well as one in Sacramento. We've got the details around those. If you're anywhere close, you'll probably want to be a part of that meetup. Head over to the coaches blog, coaching.gallup.com. We'll get you there as well. I want to say thank you to Jim and Jeremy today for taking a few minutes out to be a part of what we're doing here. We've got some good stuff coming up here in the future, including the brand new theme Thursday. So we didn't mention that. If you want to dive into these themes, and we just dove into Activator in our very first show. Kurt Liesfeld walks us through that, and we talked about Activator. Somebody mentioned that in chat. We got a whole show, 45 minutes around Activator. Head over to coaching.gallup.com as well. That'll be it for today. We'll stay around for a few minutes just in a post-show mode, but we want to thank you for coming out and joining us today. Lots of resources out there for you. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend. Thanks for coming out.